Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. This civic media education program is produced by WCKN, student-run cable television of Clarkson University. This is a partnership production of Clarkson Center for Excellence in Communication, St. Lawrence County chapter of the American Association of University Women, the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, and SeedCorn. My name is Kat Houston. I am a student in Com 427 Digital Video Production at Clarkson University. I and a number of my classmates provide the production crew for this program. The opinions expressed of this program are those of the speakers and do not represent the views of the producers, WCKN, or Clarkson University. Today we are hosting a conversation about public education funding in New York State. Joining us is New York State Assemblywoman Addie Russell, who serves the 118th River District in St. Lawrence and Jefferson counties. She will discuss the governor's education funding proposals for schools in the North Country and what citizens can do to advocate for fair and equitable funding. Joining her is Ann Carvill, a former school board president at Potsdam Central School. Ann, would you like to get us started?
Certainly. Thank you very much. Assemblywoman Russell, first of all, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate your time very much. I'll launch right into the questions because I know time is limited. My first question is about some basic lobbying. Due to state cuts in education funding for the third straight year in the North Country, schools are laying off teachers, making cuts to academic, athletic, extracurricular programs. Some schools have lost up to 20% of their teaching force, as you know. The quality of education for North Country students is being negatively impacted. What do you think North Country residents can do to lobby effectively, and what are good lobbying strategies?
Well, I'll start by saying that the lobbying effort on behalf of the North Country really began several months ago. I began meeting with superintendents and school board members to look at the impact to the upcoming budget, the one that's going to be presented to voters in the spring. Mm-hmm. We really began formulating our arguments, seeing where we might be able to impact the system. And that has really led us to the point where we are now, where we really are fleshing out a community advocacy set of issues to try to get at the severe cuts and try to impact the system in a manner that's going to help our area. And so lobbying efforts right now are kind of coming to a critical mass. Right now is the time in this state's budget process for communities and for individuals to have their voice heard and to try to make as big an impact on the process as possible. Mm-hmm. And at this point it is important to be in touch with your elected representatives, but also to start coming down to the state capitol in large groups to make an impact on the entire, budgetary and legislative process.
Well, great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. The next question, Addie, is about disproportionate cuts to average needs schools. Yes. School districts like Potsdam and Canton, who have been classified inaccurately, I believe, as average needs schools, mm-hmm. have been hit hardest with the aid reductions over the last couple of years. And I'll just make a few points here. First of all, in the Potsdam Central School that I'm well acquainted with, in 09-010, they had a $1.9 million deficit reduction adjustment. 11-12, there was a 2.6 gap elimination adjustment. And for next year, there's a 1.4 million projected budget gap. That is compounded with significant rises in expenses. For instance, the employees' pension plan is going up. Contributions are going up approximately $200,000 up to $500,000, and that's just in 3 years. Mm-hmm. The teachers' pension expenses are up from $600,000 to $1 million in 3 years, and most importantly, the health insurance premiums are up $400,000 in Potsdam in 1 year. Next year, the premium will be $4.8 million. Mm-hmm. These cost escalations combined with state aid losses are really hampering the school's ability to do business. So I have a number of questions for you. Number one, first, why do you think these schools are being cut at such levels? And second, do you think the governor is trying to force consolidations?
Okay, we'll start with your first.
Okay.
I do believe that the way that the funding system is set up is is really having a staggering impact, and that we could do things to lessen that blow. As you transition from a high needs district to an average needs district, there isn't kind of a smoothing out of that transition. If you jump from one category to the other, the difference is staggering when you're talking about state aid. So one of the things that we should be looking at is making that a smoother transition and not kind of a big cavern that exists between high needs and average needs. One of the issues that I'm looking at that is perhaps driving our area into the average needs category is, unfortunately, this state shifting its tax base from suburban and city areas onto our agricultural areas. One of the things that I'm looking at and are having discussions with is whether or not we should be capping increases to farmers' assessments so that we stop the transition of wealth from our suburbs to our rural communities. I think that's a component that we have to be vigilant of and make those adjustments when possible. As the real estate bubble has burst and suburban, I guess, property wealth has gone down, that's partially contributing to our high needs districts appearing to be more wealthy because we haven't been as affected by that. So when you're looking at kind of a fluid, stacking of school districts from high needs to low needs, we have to realize that there are a lot of factors that we perhaps can be looking at to fix that issue.
Okay. Addie, I think this would be an appropriate point to talk about the combined wealth ratio issue and a bill that you are moving ahead on.
Yes.
Could you explain why some people are very upset about the combined wealth ratio concept?
Well, this really affects schools that are at the very low end of the wealth ratio scale and those that are at the high end. The formula has been structured in a manner that makes our poor school districts here in the North Country look far more wealthy than they actually are. A floor was put into the formula, so even the poorest of school districts are seen as having a wealth ratio of 0.65, even though the vast majority of districts in the North Country fall below 0.65. So we are made to look wealthier than we are. And at the high end, they've put a ceiling in. And so no matter how wealthy your school district is, you will only be seen as being a 2.0 in wealth. My bill reduces the floor to 0.25, which would capture most of the districts in our area, and also pushes up the ceiling so that the outer limit is a 3.0 instead of a 2. And that should help to redistribute the aid that's given out and recognize the true poverty that many of our rural school districts face. Right. But the other thing is our cities, our inner cities are also extremely poor. And that's one of the ways that I think perhaps this legislation can be successful, is that we have city populations and very urban populations that can team up together and ask for equity and funding. And I think that our two voices together can be very powerful in the legislative process.
Good, so you're feeling optimistic?
I am. We've brought a tremendous amount of attention to this issue. In times when money isn't as tight, perhaps many people have not focused specifically on this part of the education formula. But at times when money is tight, driving money to wealthy suburban districts to the detriment, the severe detriment of our poorer communities, really cannot be tolerated.
Right. Good. Glad you feel that way.
Yeah.
Addie, as you well know, there's been a lobbying campaign that had its roots in Canton. It's a grassroots advocacy group of parents, students from Canton, Potsdam, Madrid, Waddington, and other St. Lawrence County school districts. They're heading down to Albany next week.
Yes.
You know all about it.
I do.
What are your thoughts about their plans?
Oh, first of all, it's critical to us getting the message, kind of to every corner of the Capitol. Having people there, having their feet there in the Capitol, bringing the message is extremely important. It keeps the pressure up on this issue. There's a very large budget, and there are lots of other organizations that come to the Capitol on a regular basis, but we need to have the students there, we need to have the parents there, really to talk about how it's affecting them at a personal level. The personal stories are oftentimes the most persuasive, and you can't do that without having the grassroots advocacy efforts that have been put together, particularly by the communities here in St. Lawrence County.
Good. Well, great. I wish them luck in their efforts. The next point I wanted to bring up, Addie, is something you know all about. A group called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity won a historic school funding lawsuit in 2007. New York's top court ruled that the state had failed to provide students in poor areas with the constitutionally required sound basic education. New York State started to comply with the court ruling by agreeing to a 4-year increase in aid to students in high needs areas like ours. This obligation has not been fulfilled due to the budgetary crisis in the state. Do you see any hope of the legislature prioritizing education and fulfilling the funding required by this ruling?
Well, the tactic that has been used for the state to continue to say that it is complying with that court order is that we haven't completely gotten rid of that concept, but what is happening in budget year after budget year is that commitment is being pushed out to a farther date. Compliance is being delayed, and that's, I guess, how some folks are convincing themselves that they're doing right by education, by only delaying complying with this court order. But at this point, I think if you looked, dollars in 2007 to dollars in 2012, that our poorest schools are actually in worse shape than they were at a time when the state's highest court said that we were not funding schools as the Constitution required. The fact of the matter is the state is not flush with cash. Right. And so, instead of delaying and allowing our poorest communities to fall farther behind in terms of educational opportunities, that is why I have stepped into this discussion on the school aid formula to try to focus the attention on decreasing funding to the very wealthy school districts that have not really felt any of the economic downturn that we felt here in the North Country, and diverting that money back into the school aid formula, and then changing it to ensure more money gets to these poorer areas. That is what we have to do at this time. We cannot, pretend that we have the luxury of holding wealthy school districts harmless. The fact of the matter is the school aid formula was manipulated to drive increasingly more dollars to wealthy suburban districts as, I think, a trade-off to complying with the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. We can't afford that luxury of driving more and more aid to wealthy districts. We have to get it back to the districts that need it most, or else our state's economy is going to be in peril for many more years than just this immediate recession.
Well, there's an old expression, Addie, justice delayed is justice denied.
It is.
And so,
This is going to be the civil rights issue of this time in history, is equity in education funding. We really rank up like 47th in terms of equity. That's the bad end of the scale. When you look at how we distribute our money in our state. You asked a question before that I didn't get to, part two, is there an effort to consolidate our schools? Well, first of all, existing regulation all but prevents consolidation, because our students would have to be on the bus far longer than what is permitted by state law. But the sad thing is, if we actually were getting the money that we deserved, we wouldn't need to look at consolidation like, that is feared by many of our communities. And also, if we were getting that money, our school districts would have the flexibility to be creative and to look at restructuring how they provide education in a way that could save more money. But right now, they don't even have the leeway to take a chance on creating a new program that could save us money in the long run, because it's just too risky to undermine their entire educational system at this point.
Oh, very interesting. I think that's one thing that is not understood in other parts of the state, the geographic vastness of this area up here and how long students have to be on buses.
Yeah, I don't think it is appreciated. No.
The state seems to end after Albany. We fall off the other end.
I'm working hard to educate my colleagues about what the realities are here in the North Country.
Good.
Yes.
It's needed, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the next question goes to the issue, Addie, of unfunded mandates.
Mm-hmm.
I have a list, a 3-page list here in a small font of unfunded mandates. During the debate on the tax cap, many legislators linked their support for the cap to mandate relief, so schools could then lower their expenses. The tax cap passed the legislature, but there has been little progress in reducing the issue of costly mandates. What can the public expect this year in regard to mandate relief? And are there any mandates that you specifically think should be taken off the shoulders of schools?
Well, you know, the difficult part about mandates that relate specifically to schools are that when you look at the mandates, you as a parent and as a community member may not want those mandates to go away. Mm-hmm. And frankly, if we were to eliminate many of these mandates, our school districts, because they're good school districts, would continue to do many of the things that they were previously mandated to do. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that has been proposed is to not require a school psychologist to be at a CSE meeting. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know any school that really would stop having their school psychologist be at a CSE meeting. Mm-hmm. You know, getting rid of that requirement doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able, in practice, to get rid of you know, of that activity. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I'm really not waiting around for a big team to meet and come up with a list of mandates that we're going to get rid of. You know, I'm progressing ahead, you know, as a member of the legislature and trying to impact those types of mandates. You know, I'm working on a bill that is moving through the committee process to allow us to buy, you know, the goods and services that we need at a cheaper rate. We're the only state in the nation that doesn't allow its governments to access other federal, state, and municipal procurement contracts. Mm-hmm. And we are paying a premium for goods and services in this state because we do not participate in that system. Another thing, you know, you mentioned statistics about pension costs. You know, the governor has a proposal that looks to address pension costs in the future. But we have to focus on pension costs right now, mm-hmm. this year and next year and the year after that. Mm-hmm. You know, we've capped property taxes and the ability of our local governments and our school boards to raise taxes, but we have done nothing to help them control the cost of their pension contributions mm-hmm. at the same time. And you know, we're really at a critical point, particularly in education, where you're very heavy on people. Mm-hmm. Education is a service industry. Mm-hmm. It's not like you have other margins, you know, that you can look to that will allow you to have significant cost savings. So I really think we need to do far more for our local governments and the state. Look at ways that we can lessen the burden at the local level.
Mm-hmm. Addie, at the meeting I attended in Canton, this grassroots movement to advocate for education funding, they talked about the issue of why can't the state buy all the new buses at a cheaper rate, and then the individual schools could buy from the state then. And you know, that just seems like common sense, but instead we're all paying a premium because so many schools own their own buses in this region as opposed to hiring a bus service.
Well, that is what this procurement reform mm-hmm. really gets at. Is, you know, we have situations all the time where a community or a government needs to purchase something, and the state doesn't even have a current contract, or it's so limited that mm-hmm. what's available doesn't really meet the need of the community. Right. By opening up these procurement possibilities, you know, that's one way that we can not just use the state's buying power, but mm-hmm. we really can be looking at the buying power of, you know, another major city or another state, yes. You know, to get something, you know, to get something that we need. And another bill I'm looking at is working to do the same thing for mm-hmm. libraries. Libraries are incredibly necessary community institutions. Mm-hmm. and they pay through the nose for the various databases that they provide to the community for, kids after school doing research, or a college student, or even an adult wanting to educate themselves more on a particular area or access information. I'm working with folks that are advocating for the library systems to reduce their costs so that they can continue to offer access to all of the resources that they have within our small communities.
Excellent. Well, speaking of libraries, of course, I agree with you as a former teacher myself and a reading teacher at that. What we're seeing in Potsdam Central, just as one indication, and probably that's typical of other schools, our libraries are not open all day to the students during the school hours because we have had to lay off employees.
Right.
Additionally, I was told we have one nurse now for 3 buildings. So these are the kinds of things that are impacting education.
Yeah, we have several different areas. We have health and safety that is being undermined, and then the quality of education that's being seriously undermined.
Right, exactly. Well, we have 10 minutes, Addie, so I'll move on a little bit here.
Okay.
The state budget vote. Regarding the state budget, most would agree that a budget is a statement about values. What does this budget tell us about Governor Cuomo's values when it comes to education? And will you vote for the budget if there is not better funding for the North Country schools?
I think the governor has tried, given the difficult financial time, to do right by our school system and to understand that they need some more money. I think our obligation in the legislature and in our communities is to look at what he's proposed and see if we can improve on that, and to look at it critically. I think that there are some areas where, if we're able to make progress on, that I can support a budget. I, of course, would like to see some changes to the school aid formula, but I think some immediate things that we have to get is a repurposing of some of the funds that he's restored to education. There is a competitive grant pot of money for $250 million. I really think that we need to put a lot of that money back into the school aid formula. $50 million of that has already been committed, and I could support an additional small amount to be used for competitive grants. But the vast majority, of that funding really needs to go to provide the basics and not extras in our school system. We're talking about basic educational needs that we are not funding, and so that's another luxury that I think we're going to have to to look at not utilizing. There's also within the money that the governor has restored, a category to increase spending in expense-based aid categories. And just in my talking with local superintendents and looking into this issue myself, I think that increase is far more than what actually we should be budgeting for, and that we should be trying to take some money from that expense-based aid category and put that back into the formula as well. So I would like to see $250 million more go back into the formula, and I'd like to see adjustments made to the formula so that more of that money is actually directed to the high needs districts.
Right. Well, great. I think teachers and administrators and parents would be thrilled if that happened.
But I will say, we have a lot more to do. The cuts that have been made to education are not going to be erased by what I just talked about. This year's budgets are going to be tight, but the following year's budgets are going to be even more tight. And so when you're talking about how you can see what people's priorities are, I think our ability to make changes this year, but most importantly, what the proposals for next year are, really should be looked at very closely as well.
Okay. Addie, some residents in the North Country feel, that since we're so sparsely populated up here and thus have fewer representatives speaking for us down in Albany, that we may not be heard. Is there reason to feel that it's somewhat hopeless?
Well, every assembly district has roughly the same amount of people in them. So to say that we're not being heard I don't think that that's completely accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other things that can be very helpful in our area's voice being heard is to find other parts of the state that are experiencing the same types of problems and work with them in a coalition. It's coalition building, relationship building, when it comes to advocacy is extremely critical.
Mm-hmm.
I work with other parts of the state and the other poor parts of the state.
Mm-hmm.
And if we come together as a coalition and we have one voice, we can be extremely, extremely successful. And that's really how any one particular member of the legislature can work to make sure that the needs of their communities are heard in a significant way, is to build those alliances and to ensure that the voice is heard that way.
Well, Assemblywoman Russell, we've run out of time. We may have a minute or so. Is there any closing comment you would like to make?
As I said before, this really could be the civil rights issue of this point in history. And it's extremely important that we put as much energy into this as quickly as possible, because if we start to attack this issue now and start making these changes to get us on a better course, we can get out of this problem. We can return equity to our state education funding process. And this is the critical year.
Addie, thank you so much.
Hi, I'm sorry we're out of time, but moving on behalf of the organisers, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to talk with us and for your willingness to participate in the local civic media program. And until the next time, remember our North Country matters.